Attacks by marine life on humans are a rare but fascinating event. People often enter marine environments and cause these interactions, which upset the ecosystem's delicate balance. Understanding the motivations and behaviors behind these attacks is essential to prevent and mitigate them effectively. By examining the complex interactions between humans and marine life, we can better understand the significance of coexisting with these fantastic creatures. Here are 6 stories. In a tranquil, idyllic area of Florida's Gulf Coast, it was the summer of 2012. As the sun rose, the sleepy little town of Cedar Key, famous for its fishing and serene beaches, was just getting going. Cecilia Vanderveen liked that the beaches in this area were not frequently crowded. She was originally from the Midwest and had traveled to Florida for warmth and tranquility along the state's sun-kissed coastline. That morning, the sea was calm and the air was cool, creating false security for onlookers. Cecilia strolled along the beach in her underwear, the cool, soft sand beneath her feet. Apart from the smooth sound of the waves crashing onto the shore, everything seemed motionless. These walks, a chance to decompress and breathe the clean, salty air, always comforted her. The beach was almost empty that morning, except for a few joggers in the distance and the sporadic seagull cawing overhead. Something strange drew her attention as she strolled by. Beside the water, a sizable, shadowy figure lay still. Upon closer inspection, Cecilia realized it was far bigger than she had initially assumed to be a piece of driftwood. The silhouette of a shark, a large one at that, caught her attention and made her heart skip a beat. The animal washed up on the beach, partially immersed in the shallow water. Protruding from its massive back was its menacing dorsal fin. Cecilia came to a stop and gazed in wonder at the beast. With a thick body coated in rough sand-speckled skin, it had to be at least 10 feet long. Its jaws opened slightly to reveal rows of sharp, jagged teeth. She felt a chill run down her spine, but she could not take her eyes off it. This was the closest she had ever seen a shark, much less a great white. Here it lay dead on the beach, an apex predator, a legendary creature. She stepped closer but cautiously because she was curious. Her heart raced with every step, intrigued and afraid simultaneously. With its body motionless, the shark's eyes remained closed. Cecilia believed it had perished, perhaps after being swept ashore after being hurt by a boat or entangled in a fishing net. She crouched next to the shark, her gaze following the curves of its enormous body. She tentatively extended her hand and touched its rough, sandpaper-like skin with her fingers. It felt exactly as she had anticipated, cold and lifeless. She was briefly astounded by the animal's immense size and strength, which had now been reduced to a lifeless carcass. However, the shark's eyes abruptly snapped open. The enormous creature gave a sharp jerk, hardly giving Cecilia a chance to react. Its formidable jaws closed quickly on her leg, its razor-sharp teeth cutting through her skin. Her body erupted in pain as she screamed, her voice drowned out by the roar of the waves and the thrashing of the shark in panic. Alive and furious, the beast started pulling her toward the water. She was gradually dragged into the surf by its enormous body convulsions. Her mind raced as Cecilia kicked and struggled to escape the shark's hold. Even more terrifying than the excruciating pain in her leg was the fear of being dragged into the sea. She was aware that she wouldn't be able to survive in the water if she didn't manage to free herself. Initially oblivious to the unfolding horror, nearby beachgoers started to pay attention. While some people screamed and others rushed to the scene, nobody knew what to do. In a few seconds, Cecilia's life had changed from a calm beach stroll to a fight for survival. Cecilia's hands clawed at the sand, trying to pull herself closer to the shore as the shark pulled her. Despite her fingers digging into the damp ground, the shark's strength was too much to handle. The shark's teeth dug deeper as it thrashed, burning her leg in agony. She could now feel the ocean preparing to snatch her up, the chilly water slapping against her back. Then a man suddenly charged at her. He went by the name of Jasper Malik. He was a lifelong resident of Cedar Key and a fisherman. While he had seen sharks in the past, he had never seen one this large or in such a terrifying circumstance. He ran toward the shark and, without thinking, picked up a piece of driftwood from the beach, swinging the homemade weapon as hard as he could. The wood did not deter the shark despite its sickening thud as it struck its side. The shark recoiled as Jasper struck it with more force this time, as Cecilia's leg continued to pour crimson into the surf, blood mixed with the salt water. Jasper lunged forward in desperation and caught the shark square on the nose with another swing. With a violent thrash, the predator let go of Cecilia's leg and retreated into the deeper water, where it vanished beneath the waves. Gasping for air, Cecilia fell to the sand, her leg a twisted mass of blood and ripped skin. Jasper crouched next to her and cried out for assistance. Other beachgoers hurried over and began calling 911, while Jasper pressed pressure on Cecilia's wound in an attempt to stop the bleeding. Cecilia could not recall the next few minutes. Her leg hurt so much that she was having trouble staying conscious as the adrenaline started to wear off. While sirens cried out in the distance, paramedics soon found her, hurriedly placing her on a stretcher and took her to the hospital. Cecilia survived the attack, but the trauma to her leg would never fully heal, leaving her with lasting physical and psychological scars. Later, she learned that the great white shark that attacked her had likely been injured or disoriented, eventually washing up on the coast in a vulnerable state. Still, the experience had irrevocably altered her. Hailed as a hero by the locals, Jasper Malik dismissed the accolades, claiming that anyone else would have followed suit. However, Cecilia was aware of this. Had he not acted quickly, she would have been pulled into the ocean and not been seen again. The incident became a local legend and a warning to anyone who ventured onto Cedar Key's peaceful beaches. Even though the ocean might be serene and lovely, there were risks that nobody could completely foresee. Cecilia never went to the beach walking alone again, even though she always respected the sea. In 2007, the merchant ship the Alecto traveled across the vast Indian Ocean. Captain Elias Thornfield and his crew of experienced sailors regularly went to Zanzibar from Calcutta, their wooden hull groaning under the soft pressure of the waves. Under a cloudless sky, the Indian Ocean, renowned for its tranquility at that time of year, stretched like an unending sapphire sheet. The ship had just passed through the Chagos Archipelago, an area renowned for its deep waters and plethora of marine life. Despite being exhausted from months at sea, the crew was relieved as they got closer to their destination. But in the previous few days, odd things started to occur. Normally calm and steady, the waters had suddenly begun to churn. Strange, low, guttural noises rose from the depths at night. They sounded less like the sea's usual underwater symphony, and more like the moaning of some monstrous creature. The men looked at each other nervously, but neither dared to express discomfort. Solomon Rook, a young man in his early 20s and one of the youngest sailors on board, had always been fascinated by the sea. He joined the crew because he was fascinated by the sea and its mysteries. And even though he had heard older sailors whisper superstitions, he dismissed them as nothing more than folklore. When it occurred, the moon was low in the sky, illuminating the ship's deck in a silvery hue. A few men remained on watch as the rest of the crew retired below deck after finishing their evening meal. Solomon saw something strange at that moment. Something sizable appeared to be moving beneath the water's surface close to the ship's starboard side. He moved closer and leaned slightly over the railing for a better view. The disturbance was visible, though the ocean was almost black. The ship's hull appeared to pulse with a deep vibration as the churning intensified. Spurred by curiosity, Solomon bent even more, narrowing his eyes as he peered into the gap. Suddenly, a huge, shimmering tentacle emerged from the water. With such speed and force that Solomon could not react, it wrapped around his leg. With an almost mechanical precision, the tentacle wrapped around him, its suction cups the size of dinner plates covering it. His body crashed into the side of the ship, and he was dragged into the water before he could cry out for assistance. Initially taken aback, the watch crew quickly took decisive action. Burly Scandinavian sailor Mikkel Haldor hurried to the edge and called out to those below deck. Not too long afterward, Captain Elias Thornfield appeared to evaluate the situation with a pale face against the moonlight. It was still possible to see Solomon thrashing around in the water, his arms wildly flailing against the hideous limb that had trapped him. The sea's roar and the mounting fear on deck drowned out his screams. The squid tightly held Solomon despite the crew's frantic efforts to lower the ropes. The squid would draw the men deeper every time they got a line close to him, briefly revealing its other tentacles to show them how pointless their attempts were. What they were up against was different from a typical creature, as Captain Thornfield realized. The enormous tentacles of the squid, now visible in the moonlight, gave the impression that it was a leviathan from the deep, much bigger than any squid the sailors had ever heard of. The crew saw the entire length of the squid rising out of the depths as Solomon was hauled farther away from the ship, and the water churned violently around him. It was enormous, its body a writhing dark mass that blended in with the darkness. With an unsettling, purposeful grace, the squid's remaining 8 tentacles rose slowly above the water. The men stood motionless, their brains processing the horror of what they were witnessing. Solomon attempted to fight with all the strength, but the squid's hold was too powerful. Due to the tentacles' pressure, he gasped for air, and his legs went numb. He sensed the cold, crushing weight of the deep ocean pulling him down the abyss beneath him. When salt water filled his mouth, his vision became blurry. Before the ocean engulfed him, ultimately all he saw was the faint outline of the ship, with the pale moonlight illuminating its deck. The squid pulled Solomon into the darkness, and his cries were abruptly cut off, leaving the crew stunned as he vanished beneath the waves. Mikkel looked at the water, expressionless, his hands still holding onto the rope they had attempted to throw to Solomon. With a pale expression, Captain Thornfield realized there was no further action they could take. When the ocean became still again, it appeared the creature had never existed. The crew stayed on deck for hours, watching the water for any indication of Solomon. However, the sea offered them nothing in return, showing no empathy for their sorrow. The men assembled in the captain's quarters at first light, their faces displaying fear and fatigue. Notwithstanding his shaking, Captain Thornfield spoke to them with a sad determination. None of them would talk about what had happened that evening as they continued their journey to Zanzibar. He asserted that man was only a guest in the ocean depths with its laws and creatures. The memory of Solomon's last moments tormented the crew of the Alecto as they continued to sail. Nobody wanted to or was able to explain what they had witnessed. Though they had made it through the Indian Ocean, depths had claimed one of their numbers, leaving only the unsettling reminder that the vast and ancient sea was home to horrors beyond human comprehension. Never to be seen again, Solomon Rooks's name was added to the long list of sailors lost to the enigmatic depths. Nobody knew what was hidden beneath the Indian Ocean surface, but the men of the Alecto would never forget the night they could see the ocean's sinister secret. The sound of breaking waves and surfers' laughter filled the beaches of Recife, Brazil in the summer of 2013. Recife, renowned for its warm climate and powerful waves, welcomed the Atlantic Ocean with open arms. Because of the construction of the Swapeport, which upset marine ecosystems and pushed sharks, especially bull sharks, closer to the coast, Recife gained a reputation for having shark attacks. Surfers like Lucio Luz Almeida and his friends could not ignore the waves' siren call despite the increasing number of incidents. The lure of the ideal break was greater than the dangers lurking beneath the surface. Luz was out with his group on this particular day at the popular surfing spot Boa Viagem Beach. The group included fellow surfer and close friend Ruan Santana, along with a few others who came along for the excitement. Luz was a lean man in his mid-20s. The swells were perfect and the sun shone overhead. Drinking and joking, surfers paddled into the water, not realizing they were not alone. A bull shark, a hostile predator renowned for its territorial behavior, had descended below the surface and was now inside the surf zone. Recife's waters were murky, a concoction of sand stirred by coastal runoff and the tides. This rendered any movement beneath challenging to spot, particularly from a predator as cunning as a bull shark. Luz was the farthest out, paddling deep to catch a larger set of waves. He only thought about the next ride as his board sliced through the water. Approximately 50 meters from him, Ruan was lying back on his board, surveying the sky. The others were already catching smaller waves as they approached the coast. Without warning, the shark struck from beneath, ramming Luz's board with such force that it nearly knocked the wind out of him. The sudden, powerful impact threw him into the water. As he resurfaced, Luz found himself floating near his broken, now useless surfboard. After the first blow, the bull shark, a massive animal measuring almost 3 meters, circled beneath him. Panicked, Luz surfaced, losing his bearings and gasping for breath. He was grazed during the attack by the shark's rough skin, and a gash in his leg was bleeding. Initially, Ruin noticed the disturbance. The thrashing in the water and Luz's broken board caught his attention. His heart ached. He was aware of its meaning. Ruin paddled fiercely toward Luz, his hands digging into the water as he yelled to the others. The group members started to paddle back as well, but they were further out. They had been nearer the coast. Their luck was running out. Encouraged by the smell of blood, the bull shark approached in a circle. The leg pain was making it hard for Luz to stay afloat even though he was trying. The surrounding water felt heavier and more menacing to him. The assailant was unrelenting. The shark crept closer with each pass, its dorsal fin slicing through the water as a silent warning of the danger below. Before Luz could get on his board, Ruin approached him and took hold of his friend's arm. However, the shark wasn't finished. It attacked once more, aiming for Ruin's board this time. The force of the blow threw them both into the water again. The shark's hostility increased with every missed opportunity to seize its meal. With more erratic movements, it circled faster and tighter. With nothing but their own will to live to protect them, the two men found themselves in open water. As the others arrived, they gathered in a loose circle around their friends. They felt a wave of panic, but knew they had to move quickly. One of them, a strong man named Carlos, was pulling Luz out of the water, reaching out with his board. To divert the shark long enough to give them a chance, Beatrice, a woman, slapped the water surface with her hands. The bull shark, however, was unfazed. It surged forward again, grazing Ruin's arm with its teeth. Blood bloomed in the water, and a grim realization set in. They ran out of time. If they did not make it to shore soon, the blood would only draw more sharks. Luz was hoisted onto Carlos's board, and Ruin, his arm hurting, scrambled back onto his own. With a frantic, desperate stroke, the group started to paddle back toward shore. The shark trailed behind, continuing to circle and look for a gap. The distance to the beach got closer with each stroke, but it moved painfully slowly. The shark launched one last lunge as they approached the shallow waters, where the waves started to break. Its teeth scraped the underside of Luz's board, but the shallow depth forced the shark to retreat. Despite their reputation for being able to swim in both fresh and salt water, bull sharks found it challenging to maneuver in the breaking waves. The shark reluctantly turned back toward the safety of the deeper waters. The group staggered onto the beach, panting and exhausted. Ruin sat beside Luz, cradling his injured arm, while Luz collapsed onto the sand, clutching his wounded leg. They had barely made it to safety. Beachgoers who had witnessed the attack rushed over, offering towels and makeshift bandages to help. Luz and Ruin were taken to the hospital for treatment as soon as paramedics arrived. Despite their severity, the wounds did not pose a threat to life. The incident became a major story in the local media in the following days. Ruin and Luz were praised for surviving, and their account was a terrifying reminder of the perils lurking in the waters off Recife. Although the event led to new demands for improved shark warnings and safety precautions, Luz's experience had a profound effect that extended beyond the news. Remaining in safer waters, he never surfed at Boa Viagem again. For him, the ocean had changed from a place of happiness and freedom to something much darker, a continual erratic threat. The feeling of being hunted and the cold, calculating predator beneath the waves would always stay with Luz, even though her memories of that day would eventually fade. It served as a reminder that despite the extent to which people thought they were in charge of the world, stronger forces were always present. In search of an abundant harvest, Olavo Cordeiro cast his fishing net into a river in the summer of 2010, deep in the humid and dense Brazilian Amazon. Being a lifelong fisherman who had spent most of his time navigating the choppy waters of the Amazon River, Olavo was a native of the small riverside town of Tabatinga. The tall trees' canopy surrounding the river created a blanket that only occasionally let sunlight peek through, revealing the murky water below. The villagers he was from depended on the river's abundance. Many had fished these waters for generations. Despite their familiarity, the Amazon was still an untamed beast with danger hiding beneath its surface. Olavo had seen many wildlife in his day, including piranhas, caimans, and the elusive pink river dolphins. The people who lived along the banks of the Amazon respected and feared it. The elders had told tales of otherworldly beings and dangerous encounters with the unknown. That said, being grounded and practical, Olavo gave those stories little credence. At least he believed he knew what was in the water. That morning, the air was heavy with moisture, and the persistent hum of insects buzzed in his ears. The river was swollen from days of rain, and the current was strong. But Olavo was determined. He needed a good catch today. The market was waiting, and his family relied on the fish he brought home. He waded into the river, his bare feet sinking into the soft mud of the riverbed, his net held tightly in his calloused hands. The water lapped at his knees as he moved deeper, scanning the surface for any signs of movement. As his net sliced through the water, Olavo felt something odd. A shift beneath him, a strange pressure in the water. His seasoned senses alerted him that something wasn't right, and he paused. But before he could back down, his body felt a sharp, violent shock. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced. His muscles seized, his chest tightened, and for a moment his vision blurred. The shock was immediate and overwhelming, as though lightning had struck him directly. Olavo collapsed into the water, momentarily paralyzed. His mind raced, trying to comprehend what had just happened. The river, once so familiar, had turned into a death trap. He struggled to move his limbs, weak and unresponsive, as another surge of electricity shot through him. This time he saw a massive electric eel, its sleek gray body barely visible beneath the murky water coiled not far from him. With a body rippling with power, the creature was enormous, at least 6 feet long. Although they were known to exist in the Amazon, electric eels, or Electrophorus electricus, were only occasionally and non-lethally shocked by most fishermen. But this was different. Olavo was utterly out of breath from the eel's intense outburst. His strength was rapidly ebbing away as his muscles spasmed uncontrollably. The eel, using its unique ability to generate high-voltage shocks, had delivered a potentially lethal blow. Each time Olavo tried to pull himself up, another jolt hit him, sending him crashing back into the water. Panic set in. The eel was not attacking out of malice, but defending itself as it perceived Olavo as a threat to its territory. But the fisherman had no time to consider the eel's motives. He needed to get out, fast. With each passing second, the river became more hostile. The eel lurking in the depths was a predator unlike any other in the Amazon, not because of its teeth or strength, but because of its ability to incapacitate with sheer electricity. In an attempt to free himself from the water, Olavo pawed at the muddy riverbank. His heart was racing in his chest, his vision was swimming, and the eel shocks were still attacking him. His muscles were not responding, and he could feel his body shutting down. His fingers sank into the mud, causing him to drag himself painfully inch by inch. Olavos's body seized up uncontrollably, and his head dipped below the surface of the water as the eel sensed that its victim was backing away and gave another shock. It felt for a moment that the river would take him, but somehow, through sheer force of will, Olavo lifted his head, sputtering and coughing as he gasped for air. With one final desperate effort, he hauled himself onto the riverbank, collapsing in a heap of exhaustion. His muscles were twitching, his skin felt on fire, and his vision flickered in and out of focus. But he was alive. He lay there, unable to move for a few minutes as his body healed from the trauma it had just gone through. Leaving Olavo alone on the shore, the eel withdrew into the river depths, securing its territory. His body continued to shake from the shock after effects as he sat up slowly and painfully. He turned to look back at the river, which had been serene before but was now terrifying. In his years of fishing, he had encountered many perils, but nothing like this. The villagers quickly tended to Olavo's wounds and heard his terrifying story after he eventually hobbled back to them. He was shaken by the experience and had psychological and physical scars. He had almost lost his life to the electric eel, a creature he had previously dismissed as little more than a curiosity. Despite his survival, Olavo used the incident as a lesson to remind people that the Amazon was still an uncontrollable force of nature, despite its beauty and abundance. A chill from the northern Pacific was pervasive in the 2006 air. Off the rugged coast of southeast Alaska near the small fishing town of Sitka, a group of adventurers had set out on a kayaking trip. This region, where towering glaciers met the sea and dense forests covered the nearby islands, was known for its abundant marine life. Kayakers frequently visited these waters to see orca pods playing in the frigid waters and feeding on salmon. For months, the four group members had been looking forward to seeing these magnificent creatures up close, and they had been excited for days. Four friends made up the group. Leona Brandt, a marine biologist on her first leisurely excursion in months. Talia Voss, a photographer and wildlife enthusiast. Ash Vesper, the youngest member and a recent college graduate eager to explore Alaska's wilderness. And Jonas Lee, a high school teacher taking a much-needed vacation from his classroom duties. Overcast skies, calm waters, and the possibility of seeing orcas made the conditions seem ideal. They paddled their stylish kayaks into the deeper waters, setting out from a small inlet close to Sitka. The far-off snow-capped mountains stood like silent sentinels along the coast, while the cold, clear sea shimmered beneath them. As they spoke in low voices and scanned the horizon for the distinctive dorsal fins of orcas, the group moved in a tight formation, their paddles slicing through the calm water. An hour of paddling later, they saw it. A pod of orcas breaking the surface not far from where they were with their black and white bodies. Talia set up her camera and started taking pictures, always ready for the ideal picture. As they paddled closer, being cautious but eager to observe the pod, the group's excitement was evident. The orcas appeared indifferent to the humans, concentrating only on their hunt, diving and coming to the surface to herd fish. Nevertheless, something changed afterward. As Jonas took the lead, he saw one of the biggest orcas splinter off the group. The orca's strong, elegant body moved intently as it went straight toward his kayak. He initially thought it was just curiosity, but the enormous creature's movements felt unsettling. It wasn't the playful circling or gentle surface gliding they had seen before. This whale seemed focused and intent. Talia, Leona, and Ash grew increasingly anxious as the orca approached Jonas's kayak. Sensing the tension in the air, Talia slowly lowered her camera. Previously charged with anticipation, the air felt heavy with something else, something darker. Attempting to give the orca some room, Jonas swung his kayak to the side, but it was too late. The orca struck the side of his kayak with tremendous force without prior notice. The effect was harsh and immediate. Jonas tumbled into the icy water as his kayak capsized. Breathlessness set in as he tried to get his bearings and felt the full force of the cold shock. The orca's massive dorsal fin sliced through the water like a blade as it circled back, terrifying the other people as they watched. The marine biologist Leona shouted instructions to keep everyone calm, but the sudden chaos drowned out her voice. Talia and Ash paddled frantically toward Jonas, but the orca wasn't done. It rammed Jonas's overturned kayak again, splintering the fiberglass hull. After the kayak broke apart, Jonas was left clinging to a piece of debris, and his face was pale from shock and cold. Now showing an aggression none had anticipated, the orca started to circle Jonas in wider circles. When it surfaced from the water, its enormous body moved with a terrifying grace, and its eyes were fixed on Jonas. With helplessness, the remaining kayakers shouted and splashed their paddles to frighten the orca away. That didn't stop the predator, though. Jonas was starting to lose his mind from the cold. Because of the chilly water, he felt weak and lethargic in his limbs. The orca reacted quickly when Talia, closest to him, tried to draw him in with her paddle. Talia stumbled as it shot upward again, getting closer to her kayak. Her heart thumped in her chest as she struggled to steady herself as her kayak shook dangerously. Leona, who was trying desperately to devise a plan but was still keeping her distance, recalled something she had read about orcas. They were intelligent animals that occasionally played with their prey. But this felt different. The orca's behavior wasn't playful. It was deliberate, almost predatory. Fearing for his life, Ash began to cry out for assistance, even though they were far from the coast. The sound of the water crashing and the kayakers' laboring breaths as they tried to remain composed were the only sounds audible. The ocean's vastness seemed like a death trap, even though it was usually a serene and beautiful place. Then, as quickly as it had started, the orca stopped. It surfaced again, its massive head breaking the water directly before Jonas. Its eye locked onto his for a moment, a cold, intelligent gaze that seemed to assess him. The orca suddenly dove deep and vanished into the murky water below. Realizing that the orca had vanished, the group was left stunned. The tension in the air gradually eased. Ash and Leona paddled over to Jonas, who was still clinging to the shattered remains of his kayak and trembling violently. Even though the weight made paddling back to shore difficult, Talia eventually got him to come closer with her trembling hands. With their bodies worn out and their hearts still racing, it took them almost an hour to reach the safety of the coast. Even though he was shaky and cold, Jonas was still alive. They had made it through. However, the encounter had left them all extremely uneasy. Luckily, they survived the ordeal. Alaska's untamed beauty, which had previously inspired wonder, now had a sinister, darker edge. None of them could forget that day and the weeks that followed. It was particularly tough for Jonas to get back in the water. Unbelievably, the orca's aggression troubled them, a constant reminder that although nature was exquisite, it could also be frightening. They had come to see the untamed power of the ocean, a force they could never fully comprehend or control, even though their goal had been to witness the majesty of orcas. The air was crisp with the biting chill of early December in the frozen expanse of Antarctica in 2014. The sun hung low in the sky over the vast expanse of ice and snow, creating a pale, ethereal glow. This was the Ross Ice Shelf, a region known for its treacherous beauty and remarkable biodiversity. The harsh environment did not stop seals, seabirds, or penguins from thriving here. The frigid waters of the Ross Sea, lapping against the coast, concealed various marine predators, the most formidable of which was the leopard seal. This was heaven for seasoned New Zealand wildlife photographer Callum Riggs. He had been touring the globe for 10 years, taking pictures of wildlife in some of the planet's most isolated and hazardous places. Antarctica, however, was distinct. Here, the lucid and merciless essence of nature held sway over humankind. Unaware of being observed by something else, he came here specifically for the penguins. A colony of emperor penguins, their black and white forms striking against the stark whiteness of the ice, was close to where Callum had set up camp. He aimed to record their everyday activities, including their graceful ocean dives, clumsy waddling, and close-knit family ties. Immersed in his work, he positioned himself at the water's edge to capture the ideal moment of a group of penguins getting ready to dive. Even for Antarctica, the year had been unusually cold, and the sea ice was farther out than usual, giving anyone near the water a false sense of security. Callum lowered his body to fine-tune the focus on his camera. He observed through the lens as the penguins gathered close to the water's edge, their heads bobbing warily as they assessed the safety of the frigid, dark waters. They exercised caution since they knew there were risks hidden beneath the surface. What Callum didn't notice, however, was the shadow trailing the penguins and now him for the better part of an hour. Just offshore beneath the surface, a leopard seal had been watching him with increasing interest. At nearly 10 feet long and weighing almost 1,000 pounds, this apex predator embodied stealth and speed in the water. Its massive head, lined with sharp teeth, was designed for one thing: to kill. Ignoring the danger, Callum chose to wade into the shallow water. He needed to get a closer shot to catch the penguin's next dive, because they had moved farther out. He was so engrossed in his work that he hardly noticed the icy water nipping at his legs through his waders. The leopard seal then struck suddenly. It emerged from below the surface with terrifying speed, its strong jaws snaking down on Callum's camera. The force of the attack was so sudden and violent that Callum had no time to react. His camera, a heavy piece of equipment, was ripped from his hands as the seal thrashed in the water, trying to tear it apart. Callum was momentarily stunned, unable to comprehend the events that had occurred. A flash of instinct took over and he staggered back, his feet slipping on the cold rocks. But the leopard seal wasn't finished. With the camera still in its jaws, it turned its attention to Callum. The seal fixed his dark, calculating eyes on him. It let go of the camera, which floated uselessly in the water, and began to charge at him. Callum scrambled to his feet and bolted toward the ice. His heart pounded as the seal lunged again, snapping its jaws dangerously close to his legs. He felt the rush of water at his heels as the massive predator relentlessly pursued him. The icy terrain made his escape even more difficult. Every step was a struggle, his boots slipping on the slick surface of the frozen ground. Unfazed, the seal kept chasing after it, When it got to the shallows, its powerful flippers helped it haul itself onto the ice and move forward at an alarming speed. Its sleek body allowed it to slice through the water with ease. Callum realized he had a limited amount of time to escape. Reminding him of its proximity, he could hear the seal's rasping breaths behind him. Callum saw a ridge of jagged ice ahead, and not having time to think, he made a desperate run for it. He clambered up the hill, his fingers numb from the cold and slick from the ice. His breath came in ragged gasps as he reached the top, turning to look back. It was just in time that he saw the leopard seal crash into the base of the ridge. It reared up, snapping its jaws in frustration as it tried to climb after him. But the incline was too steep for the seal's massive body to navigate. For a moment, both predator and prey locked their eyes. The creature's eyes showed Callum its innate primal hunger, and he knew that if he hadn't climbed the ridge, he would have become just another kill in the seal's long history. With a deep growl, the leopard seal slid back into the water, realizing its hunt had been thwarted. Callum watched as its sleek form submerged beneath the surface, vanishing as quickly as it had emerged. Callum sat on the ridge and shook, trying to catch his breath. Not the least of his worries was that his camera was gone, probably snapped off by the seal's forceful jaws. He was in grave danger of becoming just another statistic. Another sad story of a wildlife photographer who got too close to the subjects of their photographs. Following his near-death experience, Callum avoided going near the water's edge in the days that followed, as a sobering reminder of the dangers associated with his line of work. He had encountered numerous risks in his professional life, but nothing quite like that. The leopard seal had left its mark not so much physically as psychologically. When Callum related the story to other wildlife enthusiasts and photographers years later, there was always a mixture of amazement and disbelief. Although the day's video was never found again, he could still clearly recall the interaction. He would always remember his once-in-a-lifetime experience in Antarctica, with its untamed wilderness and stark beauty, but he would never wish to repeat it. Regarding the leopard seal, it stayed in that spot beneath the frigid waters, anticipating its next chance.